your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
This isn't fair! He didn't get out of the constant duty car!
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week, as summer's kind of in the rearview mirror, we decided to go full force into the opposite end of the spectrum. And our category this week is Frozen Frights. And there's quite a number of movies that fit this category and quite a number of classics and things we've already covered. But we got two good ones for you this week we want to talk about. What do you think of this category, Matt?
I love it. In media and literature, winter represents death. There's death of plant life. We have less sunlight. Most animal life goes away. So, it's something that, has been feared and conquered by humankind since the beginning of time. And without any proper preparation or having too much exposure, kind of like a virus or a toxic environment, the cold kills us. And so for a setting, for any kind of movie, it's a perfect setting.
It's
Especially
funny you
horror
should
movies.
say that because I found when I started, like, okay, let's look at movies that fit in this category. I realized we've covered a bunch of them under different categories, and that cold and that additional element of winter as almost a secondary terror. Exists in so many great movies.
Yeah, it offers the backdrop of death. Just having that cold whistling wind with nothing alive around, it just offers a great presentation style for a horror movie.
You think about classics like The Shining, wouldn't be the same without the wintry surroundings. The Thing, of course, takes place in the Antarctic with the isolation, and the cold is a big player in that. Movies like Let Me In that we covered. 30 Days of Night, pretty much any Christmas horror. I didn't realize how predominant it was till we started going down this path, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah. I mean, you have to think about, like, even if you look at literature from 1800s, I mean, a lot of people died in the winter. They just didn't have the ability to heat themselves. There wasn't as much food, so when winter came, it brought death with it. And that's something that's been inherent to human nature. So even nowadays, with all the amenities that we have, it's still inherent in us, so it just offers this horrific setting.
That deep-rooted base terror that it seems to just be woven into our DNA.
And I love it because all the neighborhood kids go inside for the winter, so I'm like, it's quiet in the neighborhood.
Well, I'm not a fan of the winter. That's why I moved to where I moved. But,
not many people are. It's a different type of person to say, hey, let's go up north and settle there where everything's dead.
Our first movie in this category that we're going to talk about this week is Misery from 1990, directed by Rob Reiner. And this is a movie I saw at the movie theaters when it came out. It's a movie I'm a huge fan of. It's based on a book that is the first book I ever read in one sitting. I sat down when Misery came out. I got the book, and I didn't get up till I was done. And I had never done that before.
That's impressive. When you told me that, I was like, wait a second, that's like 400 pages. And you just looked at me like, I'm
a pretty quick reader, and I was just totally enthralled. And
I think the most I've ever read was a book. I think I read like the Da Vinci Code. I read that in like 3 days. So that's like the fastest I've ever read a book.
This is the rare example of it's a great book. It's a great movie. And even though they've changed a few things, both stand on their own as great works of fiction, great work of film. It's just a terrific movie.
It's the only Stephen King movie to ever win an Oscar.
Interesting. Is that for Kathy Bates?
Kathy Bates won the Oscar, and the offer of Paul Sheldon was offered to William Hurt twice. This is according to Wikipedia. It was offered to Kevin Kline, Michael Douglas, Harrison Ford, Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Richard Dreyfuss, Gene Hackman, and Robert Redford all turned it down.
Wow.
Yep.
And it's funny because one of my notes is, obviously James Caan ends up playing the character of Paul Sheldon. And one of the things that I took from my rewatching the movie for probably the 10th time or more was how much he emotes with just his face. For
Yeah,
much of the movie, he's stuck in a total idle position,
yeah,
and he conveys so much nuance through his facial expressions. Um, James Caan is a terrific actor, but so are
yeah.
many of those other people. But it's hard to imagine anybody else in this role now. He was
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, he owned it. And like you said, like a lot of the looks of despair, reluctance, and like he kind of like does a lot with his eyes. He's in a bed, he can't move. I mean, there's not a lot of movement he can do. You
Sure.
know, he has to act with a sling and lying in bed most of the movie, or crawling on the floor. So he does an amazing job, like I said, communicating all of those emotions and really just he it does a fantastic job.
Yeah. Great movie, and we'll see quickly how the winter and the frozen fright takes forefront here.
Yeah.
Paul Sheldon, the author, finishes a new novel. He celebrates in his traditional manner, which I think is a really cool. He smokes one Lucky Strike cigarette
Hmm.
because he used to smoke and doesn't anymore. But he gets himself this one treat, and he has a bottle of Dom Perignon, which he has one glass. It's
Yeah.
his. It's just how he celebrates the end of every book.
And later it's mispronounced by Annie.
Yeah,
She can't pronounce it right, and you just see this like look of disgust like on Paul Sheldon's face. He's like, yeah, sure, that's what it's called. Like at
yeah,
this point, he's just done.
yeah. Dom Perignon, and
Yeah,
he
yeah.
nods and is like, "Yeah, Dom
He's
Perignon,
just
it
just
is."
get it. Yeah.
He's just totally patronizing to what he's become to know of her character.
Yeah.
So he celebrates and he leaves the lodge, driving down a snowy mountain in a '65 Mustang, which, for all his brilliance in his writing, is just an awful idea.
Yeah, and watching that car crash is another horror in this movie.
It sure is.
Yeah.
He loses control, he crashes, and he rolls down a snowy embankment in the
Mhm.
middle of a snowstorm. So we see someone pry open his door and bring him and his leather cachet with his
Satchel, whatever it is.
manuscript.
Yeah.
Yeah, his satchel with his manuscript in it, carry them out. And he wakes up in the home of his number one fan, Annie Wilkes. And she's a nurse and she's taking care of him. And she's very sweet and kind, very attentive to his needs. We see his legs are mangled.
Yeah.
He pulls down the bed sheet to look at his legs for the first time, and
Mm.
they're twisted and bent and bruised, and they just look like abused meat from the butcher.
And I thought this was a fun movie to do because I recently just broke my foot.
There you go.
Yeah, and I was like, oh,
Probably
perfect
not in the
timing.
way you probably weren't hobbled.
No, it felt like that initially, but no.
So Paul is missing. His agent calls the local sheriff, who is the local sheriff and his wife. A small town sheriff and his wife's his assistant.
She's a
That
deputy.
couple
Yeah,
is just an awesome transposition to the tension inside
yeah,
the cabin with Annie and Paul,
yeah.
because
They
he's
offer
so
some
darn
some
funny.
comic relief. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's hysterical, and she's just dry and sarcastic, and he plays off of it, and
yeah.
they're really great characters.
That's one of my favorite things that Stephen King does in his books is he's really the master at providing just amount of tension and a little bit of levity and constantly putting you on that roller coaster and then boom coming in with the horror and then going back to the tension and the levity. And this movie, I think, is one of the best adaptations because it does that really well.
Absolutely. And I one of the things that first when I was a kid and I first started reading Stephen King, one of the things that first was pulled out that I first pulled out of it was his character development was
Yeah,
so good. Like you recognize these characters. You saw
yeah,
familiarity. They were like people you knew or had met or had been around in life, and it just gave it this realistic base to everything he did, even though he was dabbling in supernatural most of the time.
yeah, yeah.
The
Stephen
characters
King,
were
when you
so
read
pure and real.
when yeah, when you read his books, I'm always jealous when I read Stephen King because I'm like, how does he know all these people.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like he's just so good at writing real people. You're like, I know people like that. And like, how is he able to just pull all of this out? He's a genius with it. But I think one thing he doesn't get enough credit for is Stephen King is actually really funny. Like he puts in a lot of great humor in all of his books. And I think most people just think of him as just like scary horror, which he's great at doing, but he also just throws in a great flavor of comedy. And they, like you said, you know, the deputy and the sheriff kind of offer that in this movie, and you can see it.
Yes. So Paul, with Annie being so kind and helpful and nursing him back to health, he lets her preview his new novel. It's a non-Misery Chastain novel that Paul views as serious literature. We see a quick scene with him and his agent where he's kind of disappointed that he's built a career out of this Misery Chastain character, where they seem to be kind of dime store adventure romances that really don't, in his mind, offer any literary merit, but they're hugely successful.
They become the bane of his existence. He's like telling his agent, he's like, I don't want this to be my legacy. I want to be done with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he lets number one fan Annie read the novel, and she brings it back. He's like, well, what do you think? And she's like, yeah, you know, who am I to criticize somebody as brilliant as you? But then she's like, yeah, I got it. It's the swearing, Paul. It's the swearing. It just,
Yeah.
and he's like, well, this is a book about these type of kids. I
Hoodlum.
was
Hoodlum.
one of
See,
those kids.
I grew up a hoodlum. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a hood rat. I was a hood rat, and this is how everybody talked.
Yeah.
And she blows up, showing her temper for the very first time that, you know, not everybody talks like that. And she uses some really colorful examples about when I go to the store, do I order, you know, and her temper just rises and rises. And Kathy Bates deserved an Academy Award for this because the off and on between the almost childlike character of Annie Wilkes and the psychotic mad character, she floats quickly up and down these emotional scales, and it's really overwhelming to watch.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and it's great direction by Rob Reiner too, because these shots like they come in to like slowly come into her face as she's like getting mad, and you have this like wonderful shot of her just like exploding, and then when she's done it, the camera kind of pans back immediately, and she's back to being normal. So like you kind of have this great visual on top of her acting, and the movie does everything perfect.
Yep. So Annie goes out and she buys his newly released book, Misery's Child. And he says, well, I thought the roads are out. He's like, well, the road into town is clear, but not the one to the hospital. She's been selling this. The phones are out and the roads are closed, is why he's stuck at her place.
Yeah, and it's sunny outside. Like you can look right out the window, and it's like the blizzard's over, you know. But she doesn't care. She just keeps lying.
Yeah, roads haven't been cleared yet. It's a small town, and you get your first. He's got his first inkling that between the temper and this, now he's like, okay, something might not be right here. This isn't necessarily just a good Samaritan.
Right.
So she's reading the book. Paul's trying to heal, and when she finishes the book, Misery dies in the book. And this is, we don't know this, but we knew Paul said he wanted to be done with her. So it makes sense. She freaks out and she comes into his little room that she's made him with a single bed, almost like a hospital bed.
Yeah. And
she's yelling and she's smashing stuff and she's breaking stuff. And as she turns to leave, this is a great piece of acting by her. She's mad, she's smashing, she's completely manic. And as she turns to leave, she's sweating, her hair's disheveled. She looks back and says, no one's coming for you, Paul. I didn't call your agent. No one knows you're here and you're not getting out. And it's just such a tonal shift. And it's like, okay, game on.
Yeah. He just becomes like sunken. You know, he just goes into this like into this cavern of depravity. Like it's no one's going to help you, and she wants him to know that. Like it's like this is going to get like it's psychologically going to be bad for you, and pain. Like it's going to be everything bad for you. Like I just want you to know that. Yeah. It's just it starts to become real evil. It's the best portrayal of a wolf in sheep clothing. And what I like about it is like the character development of her characters. Like she slowly becomes more evil, but that's actually who she is.
Yeah, and what I to expand on that, I think a little bit is as her evil gets more and more prevalent,
Mhm.
she's also quick to slip back into the sweet, smiling,
She never
adoring
stops.
fan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
There's at one point in the movie, to what you're saying, at one point in the movie when she has him like we'll get to this part later, but she has him like rewriting the book, and she waves to him in the window, and he just like flips her off, and she's like, "Oh, you're such a kidder." Like
yeah,
she's just like, yeah, she goes back and forth from this childlike to being evil.
yeah, it's unbelievably well done.
Yeah.
Um, Paul, and she leaves, so she gets in her car and drives away. Paul falls out of bed and crawls over to try the door, and he finds it locked. And she doesn't return till the next morning, and she finds him on the floor, and she's being sweet to him again. Let me help you into bed, you poor man.
Oh, that's Fooey talk. Come on. Yeah, she's being all.
And then she gets him up in bed and says, I know what we have to do. We have to burn your new book. And being his number one fan, he's like, well, it's no big deal. I already sent it to my agent. There's dozens of
We have an
copies
auction
out
on it.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
She knows he's lying because she knows everything about Paul Sheldon, and she knows he only keeps one copy. So she throws it in the barbecue pit.
Yeah, she brings a little barbecue pit right next to the bed. I thought that's a hilarious bit. Like there's comedy in that. Yeah.
And she's spraying lighter fluid on it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to do it. Obviously, it's what he believes to be a serious work that he just wrote, something deep and personal to him, and she wants him to burn it.
Yeah.
And he's trying to play it off, but she's not buying it. And then she starts splashing the lighter fluid all across his bed.
Yeah.
She's like, come on, Paul.
like not even threatening to do anything to him. Just like, come on, we're reasonable people. And she's just like dancing around, like spraying it everywhere, like insinuating what she's about to do.
Yeah. The threat is very clear while she's smiling and grinning happily. It's
this is the Lord's work. I'm freeing you from this. Yeah.
so faced with not really any choice, he lights a match and drops it in on his novel that he just finished.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where he's full on board. He hates her, and she comes back and sets up a table and a typewriter, and she bought him supplies, and she expects him to write misery back to life. And he's like, okay. And then I love the scene with the paper.
Yeah.
She gets him a typewriter from the secondhand or the Goodwill or whatever, and the end doesn't work. So she has to manually write in all the ends for him while she's reading the manuscript.
Yeah.
She buys him the most expensive paper, and he says, "Yeah, it's the most expensive," but he has to demonstrate how it smudges. He's like, "Look."
Yeah.
He writes the word, types out the word smudge, and then he wipes it, and it smudges. And she's like,
yeah, it's like white single bonded paper, and he needs a white long grain Mamimo or something like that. Like it's a certain kind of paper that won't smudge.
She's like, huh, it does smudge. She's like, what do you know? And then she takes it, and then she angrily takes it to go replace the paper, even though he showed her clearly why. But
right.
Yeah.
Nothing he can do is right. Like everything he does is it's everything that she does wrong is his fault. Like when she spills the soup in the beginning, she blames it on him. Look what you made me do. It's just like she's insane. Yeah.
So she slams the paper on his bad legs, and then picks them all up and leaves. When he leaves, he has a chance to explore, but he finds a bobby pin on the floor, and that he figures out how to use the bobby pin to unlock the door, and he wheelchairs himself out into the house. And he gets to see, he's looking around, and she comes back home, and he's in the kitchen, and he starts scrambling, and he can barely fit through the kitchen door, and he has to get all the way back into his room and get it shut and get it locked. So he gets all that done.
It's done really tense. It's the most tense wheelchair scene I've ever seen.
Yeah, the tension.
You're like rooting for Paul Sheldon. You're like, come on, get back in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And she luckily drops one of the reams of paper at the step to buy him an extra 5 seconds or so.
Yeah,
she has to bend and pick it up, and he gets in and he gets the door locked and he gets back, and he is sweating profusely now at this point, right? He's been inactive for weeks. And
and he's also been being drugged on opiates too. So yeah, he's a mess.
Yeah. So she comes in and the sweat's pouring off him. She's like, "What have you been doing?" He's like, "You know what's the matter with me?" He turns it around brilliantly, basically saying, "You left without giving me my medication, and I'm in pain here."
Yeah.
Even though he's actually not taking his medication.
Right. He's hiding it. Yeah, because he knows that she's trying to keep him addicted to it. Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, the sheriff actually has been doing some looking around, doing some investigating, and he finds the car. They find it with a helicopter, and he looks at it closely, and he sees the crowbar marks on the door, and figures somebody pulled her out. Press isn't covering that. The feds who are taking the interviews aren't covering that. But he looks at it, and anyone would look at it in 5 seconds and say, you don't crowbar if you're inside.
Yeah, something's going on here. Yeah.
So they think Paul Sheldon is dead in the snowbank, and they'll find him in the spring. He thinks something else is going on. Paul has been saving all of his pain pills, and in the paper he made a little envelope like packet, and he's pouring the powder in. So he starts writing, and in one of my favorite scenes, Annie comes in with what he's written. And she's like, "No, it's no good. This doesn't work." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And she tells a story about as a kid going to the cereals at the movies. And I've heard about this, and I'm too young to have ever experienced it. But man, I would have loved to have gone. Every week at the movies, they played a newsreel, a cartoon, a cereal, and then the feature film.
Yeah.
And, I've read so much about that era that I just would have loved to experience that. But
yeah.
She starts telling him how the cereals weren't always true. And she tells a story about, I think it's Rocket Man, and he's welded in a car and no brakes, and the car goes off a cliff. And the next week they come back, and he rolls out before the car goes off the cliff. And she was mad. The rest of the audience was cheering, and she's like, "That's not what happened. You're lying to the audience." And I actually agree with crazy Annie Wilkes. I hate when shows do that. They lead you down one direction, and they say, "Oh, but this is what happened," and you're like, and she's frantic, and she's pounding on the table, and she goes, "He didn't get out of the cock-a-doodle car."
Yeah, and you're kind of the same way. Like, you know what? I have to agree.
And I do. I'm like, I agree. If you gotta pull a switch like that, it's got to be real. Something's got to ring true. So she makes him start over.
Yeah. And he's asking about like, oh, he's pandering to her. He's like, "What's in this meatloaf?" And she's like, "I had a little spam." And I'm like, "You just can't stop torturing this guy." Like,
let's give it a little kick. Yeah, the dinner is so that his second attempt to bring Misery back to life, she loves. And this makes so much sense, and oh my God, this ties into this, and she's going on and on as a fangirl would. And she's just giddy that Misery is now alive. And Paul invites her, "Will you have dinner with me tonight so we can celebrate Misery being back?" And it's a beautiful setup by Paul. She makes the spam meatloaf. But his point was he wants to have wine. And so he pours out the wine and then says, "Do you have any candles? That would make this dinner absolutely perfect." So when she goes to get the candle, he pours the powder in her wine, and his plan is very clear. He's going to knock her out.
Yep.
Give
her some time to escape. That'll drug her. She'll pass out for a couple hours, and he can book it.
Yep. So it's a great plan, really. And he's been working on this for a while.
Yep.
And she comes back in with the candle, and they're getting ready, and she bumps her drink and knocks it over, spilling the entire thing. So she has to pour herself another.
And he has this look of despair. Like she's trying to clean it up, and like it just slowly zooms on his face, and he's like, "Oh my God!"
All his efforts.
It's another one of those scenes that's just the direction is just fantastic.
Yep. And like she's refilling her wine, and he just no longer cares.
Yeah, he's just. I want to go to bed.
So the book is going good, and at one point, Annie comes in and professes her love for Paul. And she's kind of like, she's down. She's like,
it's a rainy night. Yeah.
Very depressed. And she's like, I love you, Paul. It's like I always loved the writer, but now I love more of you. And she's like, I know you don't love me. Don't say you do.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it's like for someone like me to face losing someone like you. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very deep actually. And
Yeah.
she shows him the gun she has and says, I may actually get some bullets soon. And then she leaves the room, and it's very like we know how uneven she is as a personality.
Yeah.
Just very creepy.
Well, it's not just creepy; it's also raining out, so we know the blizzard thing is that's done. Like there's no blizzard. It's like clear to him. It's like, okay, why am I'm being kidnapped? There's no blizzard. There's no more excuse. She never called anyone. This is just clear madness. Like
Mhm.
there's no more BS. There's like it's just she's just straight up crazy, and he knows it. Like he's not even trying to argue his way out of this anymore.
Yeah, yeah. He knows his only hope is to figure out a way to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, let
Drug her
somebody
or
know
kill
or
her or get out of
escape.
there. Yeah, he's got to be resilient in some way.
So she leaves, and Paul gets out of his room again, and he's going through her house, and he sees a scrapbook that she has out where she's added a bunch of news clippings about Paul Sheldon's disappearance. And as he leafs through the scrapbook, there's a whole bunch of things about other incidents and people dying
Yeah.
and baby deaths
Yep.
at a
At the
hospital
hospital that
ward
she's the
she was
head
in
nurse
charge
at.
of.
Yeah. Yeah. The dragon lady, they
They call her
call
the
her.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they call her the Dragon Lady. There's actually a record of her arrest on there. So we get kind of a quick history into Annie Wilkes, and her psychosis is not new.
Yeah. And we are about to find out how devilish she really is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, because he's out looking around, he also takes a butcher knife from the kitchen, and he hides everything under his mattress on his
Yeah.
left side.
Yeah. And he's actually hiding this in a sling, and he's like practicing taking it out. And he's like in the bed taking it out, like, I'm gonna get her.
Yeah, well, as we said, he realized his only option is somehow overcoming her.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the middle of the night, she comes in and injects him with something, whatever she knocked him out
Some
with in the
needle.
first
Yeah.
place. And he wakes in the morning. He's all loopy and drugged and completely tied down.
It's kind of giggly. Yeah. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like
Like was
drunk.
on morphine or something. Yeah. Yeah.
And she tells him very calmly, and she's speaking, calmly, rationally, that she knows he was out of his room, and she found his key. She shows him the bobby pin, and he's reaching underneath for the knife, and she's like, "Oh, you're looking for this," and she tells him that she wants him to stay forever, right? Which is
Yeah.
really just an evil
She's
thing to say.
yeah, she's off the wall. She's off the chain.
And she starts talking about, I think it's the Peruvian diamond mines.
The African, I think it was the African diamond mines. Yeah.
And while she's doing this, she positions a 4x4 between his ankles. And she says, they did this thing called hobbling.
Yeah. It was Project Hobbling. Yeah.
And in one of the most cringy and impactful scenes, I think, in all of cinema, because this isn't a blood and guts movie. This is a psychological,
Yeah.
warfare type of movie.
Yeah.
She swings the sledgehammer against his foot, and it just snaps inward.
And he's just like watching, no, no, don't do it. Yeah. And she's like, oh, hush, child. Yeah. How's this? Yeah.
And in the book, it's an axe.
Yes. Yeah. She actually cuts his feet off in the book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is more impactful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really think it is. It's so brutal. It's so quick.
Yeah.
And to watch that foot just flop
Yeah,
inwards as it's hammered.
It's crunchier. It's crunchier. The bones are going to break and splint and stay inside you. Yeah, it's Bruce. It's brutal.
It's so.
Then they show her. I love cinematically. They show her walk across the bed and like looking at him, smiling at him, like, "Oh, darling, we're not done yet." I don't know if she says "darling," but it's that attitude.
It's just okay. There's just one more, and
and so
and he
evil,
swings again.
Yeah.
It really is. I think it's one of the most memorable scenes in cinema.
Yeah. Kathy Bates deserves the Oscar for this, if there's ever been an Oscar deserved.
The sheriff kind of runs across Annie back in town, and he gets a little suspicious. So he starts looking into some things, and the sheriff had bought a bunch of the Paul Sheldon novels, just reading through just to find, some insight into the man. And he goes and finds out that Annie buys all of his books and makes the general storekeeper set aside the first copy that comes in for her every time.
Yeah.
And that she bought a bunch of writing paper.
Hmm.
And the sheriff, for all his one-liners with the wife, we see him along the way picking up on things that nobody else is picking up on. So the guy's like, "What, did Annie do something wrong?" He's like, "Oh, not a thing," and he just backs out the door. And
he's like, "Yep, gotta go." Together. He's smart enough not to give other people information because he doesn't need other people shutting him down on his investigation. Like, he's not an old jaded cop. Like, he's been a good sheriff his whole life. He's been a good investigator. He just happens to be in a small town where there's not a lot going on. But once there is, he's like, "Oh, I know what to do. This is game time."
Yeah, and it's funny. I really liked this because he read a quote in one of the Paul Sheldon books, and at night he's reading in bed with his wife, and he highlighted it and underlined it.
Yeah.
And then when he was looking into Annie Wilkes, he sees her at her trial for the death of the
Dragon Lady stuff. Yeah.
Use the same quote.
Yeah.
And he's really like, boy, I think I got something here.
I think he's putting it together. Yeah, yeah. And it's good investigation, too. He's reading all the books. He's like, why would a psycho read these books? There's something in these books I'm missing. And that was actually really smart of him to do that. He's up late at night doing research. Yeah.
Yep. So the sheriff goes to pay her a visit. And she sees him coming. She injects Paul and basically brings him into the basement.
Yeah.
And she's showing the sheriff around like anything, but she's acting weird. And we've seen so many faces of Annie Wilkes. It's hard to know which weird she's in at this point.
Yeah. You don't know if she's gonna turn on the cop or if she's just gonna like present nicely to him and hope he leaves. Like, it's actually in itself another tense moment.
It's very tense. Yeah. And we see Paul start to come awake a little bit in the basement. And is the sheriff going to hear him? And is there any chance he's going to get out? The sheriff starts to leave. And as he's on the front steps, Paul knocks over the same barbecue pit that was used to burn his manuscript.
Yep.
And makes a noise. So the sheriff runs back in, runs into the kitchen, opens the cellar door, and a great scene. He's looking down at a Paul Sheldon laying on the floor of the basement. And he's like, "Mr. Sheldon?"
Yeah.
And immediately is shotgunned right from behind, right through his chest.
Yeah, because you think it's it. You think he's saved.
But the whole time you're like, where's Annie? Where's Annie? Where's Annie?
Yeah, and he falls down, and there she is with the barrel of the smoking shotgun, and she's like, no.
So our poor sheriff, who's a great character, is now dead.
Mm-hmm.
And Annie tells Paul that their time will end soon and that she has 2 bullets in the gun.
Yeah.
And Paul is only able to convince her. He tells her that he loves her, which he's playing on her craziness.
He's desperate.
And that he understands that they have to go. Their time is done, but they have to finish the story and bring Misery back to life first.
Yeah, he's like, we can leave this for all of time. He's like, you're gonna like we can immortalize her, and instead, if we don't finish this, she's dead. Because that last book, she's dead. So if we don't do this, she doesn't get immortalized. And Annie's like, I'll cook you some dinner.
So he plays on her emotions effectively, and
her
in the
insanity,
basement, yeah. And in the basement, he grabs he manages to tuck the lighter fluid in the back of his pants,
right in his butt.
Yeah, weird place for lighter fluid, but
hey, you got to do what you got to do.
So he's back to writing, and he's almost done. She's coming in, she's reading everything that he's pounding out, and there's 1 chapter left, and he's like, okay. She comes in and she's like, I can't wait to read the last. Oh my God, it's so good. Is he going to do this? Is he going to do this? Oh my God, it's so good. And he says, it's done. And I want my traditional celebration when I finish a book.
I need 3 things. You know what I need? Yeah.
And she's like, I do. And that's where the Dom Perignon comes up. And he's like, and he nods and he's
like, sure. Just
it's like this perfect grin. He's like, Dom Perignon it is. And well, then she comes and gets everything. Now he has the match. And he sends her back. He goes, this time we're going to need 2 glasses.
Yeah.
Oh, Paul, like he's got it wrapped around her finger
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
certain times.
Yeah. The acting is just top notch between these two. I can't recommend this movie enough. But yeah.
So she comes back in with the second glass, and at this point, he's got the final chapter and everything else on the floor, covered in lighter fluid, and he's holding the
Yeah.
match.
Yeah. He's got it rung up like he's got it rung up like all wrinkled in his hand, like he's getting ready to light
Yeah,
it.
he's lighting a torch, and yeah, and he's teasing her. He's like, and he starts asking, like, oh, is he her real father? And all these unknown mysteries of this Misery Chastain story that we don't know. He's like, oh, it's all right here. And she's like dying to know it. And he lights it.
Yeah.
And Annie dives on the burning paper to try to save it. And at this point, he picks up his typewriter, something we've been seeing in practice, and he smashes her over the head with it.
Yeah, I didn't catch on to that until actually this is like the third time I've seen this movie. And but I kind of watched it casually in the past and I loved it then, but like I never realized what he was doing. And now I realize what he was doing. He was trying to make sure he was able to lift it and slam it.
It was kind of just like the practicing with the knife. It was,
Yeah,
I'm preparing
yes.
for this moment.
Exactly. Yeah, that never clicked until I watched it this time, but
It doesn't kill her, however. As he hits her as hard as he can, and she goes down, but she gets up and turns around and shoots him in the shoulder.
Yeah.
And
Just
he
one
falls
bullet.
forward out of the wheelchair on top of her.
Yeah.
And they struggle and they're fighting and they're wrestling. And she finally gets up and she's going to get the gun or get away. And he grabs her ankle and she trips and falls and hits her head on the typewriter.
Yeah.
And it sure looks like she snapped her neck.
Yeah, $1 million baby.
Yes. Oh, yeah, great analogy. But it wasn't snapped. He's crawling away.
It looked like it was bludgeoned. Yeah.
And she gets up, and now she's bloody and just completely wild.
Yeah,
there is no teetering back and forth.
It's very feral.
Yeah, she's mad, insane, and she's on the attack. And he finally kills her with a metal pig. And she collapses,
which is so iconic. It's so perfect because the pig's name is Misery.
Yep. And she just finally dies and falls dead on top of him.
Yeah, boom.
And we cut to 18 months later. And Paul's walking with the aid of a cane from the abuse his legs took over and over. He has a new novel. It is a critical hit.
Yeah, it's his first one he's getting an award for. His first time he's winning an award. He's made all of this commercial success with his 50 Shades of Grey. Right? This this nonsense thing that he was writing that he hated. Yeah, and now he's finally getting like an award, and he's just like it's not fulfilling to him.
He said, I realized something in that room. He goes, I wrote the one for the fans, wrote the other for the critics. He's like, but I don't care. He's like, and I write for myself.
I wrote this for me, he said. Yeah.
And so he's doing well, but he still sees Annie from time to time, and there's a cool scene where
he has PTSD.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The waitress comes out and he sees Annie, and
it's Kathy Bates walking solemnly at him. Yeah.
and then it's just a regular waitress offering him desserts.
Yeah. And she says, and she looks at him and says, "Oh my God, Paul Sheldon, I'm your biggest fan."
Yeah, it was perfect. Yeah.
This movie's go ahead.
No, it's just such a quality movie from top to bottom. There's really nothing you could say negative about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I highly recommend this movie to anyone. I love it. Like I said, this is like the third time I've seen it. I started reading the book. I got like 50, 60 pages in, and they're both just top notch, And it was interesting doing research. Like this was kind of an allegory, like Stephen King when he wrote this book. It was kind of an allegory to like, how he's like how criticism can come to a writer and how it can kind of drive them crazy. Like he swears a lot. He was swearing a lot in late 70s, early 80s in a lot of his books. And people like, why do you have to swear so much in your books? He's like, what do you mean? I grew up in New England. This is just kind of what I know. And it was kind of like he was kind of going against what people said about him. It's just kind of about what he was going through, and which was interesting. Like you kind of have to write for yourself when you're writing. You know, like don't like you can't let the critics like tell you, they'll torture you and make you feel miserable by telling you how you should write your stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and you can kind of feel imprisoned in that sense, which is an interesting allegory because on top of that, it just makes for a great movie.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and of course, fan is short for fanatic. We
Right,
tend to
right.
forget that. So
Yeah,
I got to imagine, as a super famous author, you have a precarious relationship with your fans who you love and appreciate, but who
right.
probably
But
push the envelope beyond where they should.
why'd you kill off my character? You see that with Game of Thrones. I watch Game of Thrones every year for like 10 years and everyone would just get mad. I'm like, well, then you go make a show.
Right? Yeah.
You know, like,
If you
or don't
haven't
watch
seen
it.
Misery, check it out. If you've
check
seen it, it's worth revisiting because every time I see it, I take greater depth from it. It's just that good.
I think it's a timeless movie and it's 100% worth the watch. Go watch it.
Our second film we're going to talk about tonight in the category of Frozen Frights really hits the nail on the head with the title of Frozen. And it's not the animated Disney movie. It is from 2010,
Yeah.
directed by Adam Green, who was known for the Hatchet series, the Victor Crowley slasher movies.
Yeah.
And this movie is, Misery takes place and the frozen and the weather is a secondary character. It causes the car wreck. It kind of, creates the road closures. In this, the weather is actually one of the main characters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the, I love skiing. I remember going the first time I went skiing when I was 10 years old. And that was a horrible fear I had the whole way. I gripped the lift and I was like, what if we get stuck? Like no one at 10 years old tells you that. It's just a fear. Like this is just a fear that people have. Like, what if we get stuck? So like I think this movie just has the super simple premise and it works.
Yes. And that's something I wrote in my notes here. We'll talk about later on. But the movie starts, we're at a ski resort. Joe, his girlfriend Parker, and his best friend Dan, rather, and his girlfriend Parker and his best friend Joe. And they pay off a lift operator to get access to the skiing.
Yeah, and this movie starts off with like this fun, remember those 80s ski movies? Like it just has this fun college vibe to it. They're in New England. They're kind of just like they're college kids. They're goofballs. They're just having a good time.
Yep. And they get their access, and Parker and Joe are kind of making remarks back and forth, or a little arguing, a little nitpicking. You can see the struggle dynamic for Dan's attention. You got the lifelong best friend and the girlfriend of 1 year.
The recently new girlfriend.
Yeah. And it's like, he's my buddy. Well, no, he's my boy.
Yeah, and Joe's kind of like, oh, I'm the third wheel, I guess, like putting a passive aggressive, passively aggressive towards his best friend. And he's like, dude, come on, I'm with my girl. And there's this whole young, early 20s dynamic. It's kind of funny.
It is. And they end up spending most of the day on the bunny slopes because
they have the montage.
Because Parker can't really ski.
Right. And normally in the 80s movies, when you saw those montages, they were all really good. But in this montage, they're all really bad. It's just them crashing. I thought that was funny.
So they spend most of their day on the bunny slopes, and Joe's a little disappointed, a little unhappy with it. So it's towards the end of the day, and the lift is closing, but they go back and they pay the same guy who's apparently open to bribes to let him go up one more time so they can go down a real slope.
They don't pay him. They say, well, we'd pay you, but we don't have any more money. And they just beg him. And he's like, all right. Just like he finally gives in. He's like, you get one run. You get one run and we're done.
Yeah. And it's tragic because that operator gets called away to talk to the boss.
And he's the only one that knew that they didn't have passes.
So he tells his replacement, there's 3 more coming down. Make sure you got to wait for them.
Yep.
So after a couple minutes, 3 snowboarders come down. So the guy thinks the place is empty. They're shutting down. They're closing down for the week. It's a Sunday and they're not reopening until Friday.
Yep. A lot of places do that. Yep.
So so he thinks they're done. So he shuts it off. So our 3 main characters on their chairlift just stop on the way up, and it's starting to get dark. There's the lights of the resort and so forth. But they think, okay, we're stuck here for a minute. They were stuck earlier in the day.
Yeah.
But the difference was earlier in the day, all the other chairs were full. Right now, they're alone.
Right. Yeah. And they don't even realize it. What's really cool about this scene, this is, this movie was kind of made on a budget, and that they did a great job with the cinematography for being on a budget. You can slowly see the lights behind them, like 6 lampposts back, shut off. Dunk, dunk, dunk. And as they're shutting off, they're still having this casual conversation. And then when it gets to them, it's like, dunk. And it's just like, they're like looking around like, what? And I just thought that one scene right there, for the 6-second scene that it was done really well.
It was, yeah, because we can see it coming.
And they can't. They're still
And
casually talking.
They're like,
they superimpose
they're telling
that.
jokes or whatever. We'll be moving in a minute.
Yeah.
And once the lights shut off, now they're really scared.
Because usually when you see that kind of scene in a movie, it's like in a hallway in a hospital or something like that. And like the lights start to shut off. The characters are aware of it. But I like how they weren't aware of the lights shutting off behind them. I just thought that was really creative.
Yeah, it was well done for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So now, they know the place is closed for 5 days. They're really thinking they are forgotten up there. They're really getting scared, and bad weather starts to come in. It's cold. They're high up in the air. They don't know how long they can survive like this. They see a snow groomer comes into view. A guy's, doing the hills, and they start throwing stuff at the vehicle to get his attention.
Yeah, Parker throws her gloves, so now she's one glove less, which is a terrible idea because you don't have a glove on that hand.
A glove is not going to.
Should have thrown your skis. You don't know the skis. Throw the skis. She's still wearing her snowboard. Yeah,
they actually hit the vehicle with one thing, and the guy still doesn't stop. You hear?
Well, no, he looks, but then there's nothing there.
Yeah,
and it's like really snowy, so he turns around to his like he does hit him, and he looks, but it's just like it's like the frenzy of the snow. It's not enough,
A cool cameo that was Kane Hodder, who was driving that snow grooming machine.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So the snow groomer leaves, and now they're back to being sunk. And they turned them around due to the weather. And it kind of doesn't make a little sense, because they're saying, well, snow groomer will come tomorrow, and like, why would they snow groom? They're closed for 5 days. So it really doesn't make sense why the snow groomer was out there Friday night after they closed anyways.
Yeah.
Other than to offer this teasing bit of hope for them that is short-lived.
Yeah, or he didn't know. That's why they told him to come back, because he's out there just like doing his regular rounds. Like maybe at the end of the shift, he's supposed to do that. And they get on the dispatch. They're like, "Hey man, there's a blizzard coming. Come back." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he turns around.
Yeah. So. Dan decides that one of them has to jump, and decides that he will do it. Now, one of my favorite parts about this movie is there's a lot of tension. The cold weather's a factor, the height's a factor, and it's one of those movies that makes you ask, "What would I do?" And I really love it when
everyone does. And I thought the same exact thing. I thought when I'm watching this movie, I'm like, everyone says they know what they're gonna do, and no one knows what they're gonna do in that situation. That's you don't know what you're gonna do.
I know what I would have. I know what my plan in my head, being safely in my living room watching it, would be.
Right.
And I said it the first time I saw this movie. I said to my wife, I know exactly what I would try to do right here. And no one ever tries to do it. So
is it all right? Go ahead.
I'll tell you about it after.
Okay.
I don't want to ruin what they did or didn't do.
Yeah. We can actually have a discussion about that after, because I found some interesting ideas online of what people's ideas of what they would do, and I thought some of them were pretty interesting.
So Dan jumps, and
go ahead.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. He jumps, and then he snaps his legs.
Yep. Snaps both legs with compound fractures, and the bone just sticking out.
See, if I was going to jump, then I would go top turnbuckle, Macho Man Randy Savage, down. You want to land on your side. Like if you look at every like WWE wrestler, when they're doing those like 20-foot drop off the cages, they're landing on their side, right? Like you want to have the impact. Sure, you're probably going to dislocate your shoulder and you're going to hurt your hip, but that's the worst of the damage. Like you want to come down on your side on that, like a break fall.
I was thinking more flat on my back.
Well, you could, but you could blow your back out. You could blow your back out if you go on your side. If you go on your side, you could keep your vertebrae in line more. And at most, your shoulder and your hips are going to take the damage, which is probably the least damage you can take. That's why when you see a lot, like you could do the back, but I would kind of go down my side.
I wouldn't have jumped, bottom line, but
I wouldn't have either.
so he's in trouble.
Yeah.
He jumped down to help them, and he's in big trouble. The bone is sticking straight out. He's stuck in the snow, and lo and behold, wolves come.
Yeah.
And
which, by the way, no one should underestimate. They're like, oh, they're just some wolves. It's like, no, they're one of the most apex predators on the planet, next to bears. Like,
I wouldn't have underestimated that. One wolf would be.
I saw some people say just get out and run, and I was just like, what?
Yeah,
you're not. Those things are going to hunt you for 40 miles.
In the middle, you mentioned the cinematography, but in the middle of this, after he lands and it's gruesome, and you get like this reset of lost hope. There's this great long range shot of the mountain, and it's a beautiful shot, but it kind of highlights the quiet, desolate nature of where they are, and really adds to the hopelessness.
Yeah, and that whistling wind, there's just nothing in the distance but wind and death.
Yeah. He manages to scare one away. And Joe says, hey, look, I'm going to do something. So Joe decides he's going to climb back down the wire and try to get down to a lower
just kind of like rope it. Yeah.
And of course those ropes are wound steel.
Yeah.
And they're sharp. And it's tearing through his gloves. He can't make it. So he gets back in the lift, and him and Parker are just sitting there helpless. And now many wolves come, and they listen to Dan get torn apart and eaten.
Yeah. Which going back to my off the turnbuckle, this would be a great time to jump because you're going to land on the wolves. So
yeah,
that's what I was thinking of watching. Like, now you jump, you land on the wolves who don't hear you coming from the sky. Like, and you use their body, you kill the wolves, and then they break your fall.
I don't know if you'd land on all of them at once. There was like
if you can get on at least one or two of them.
So it's an awful scene. They don't show.
I'm not a good person to be stuck on a lift with, Jerry. I wouldn't make good decisions.
Oh man. So it's a great scene actually, because they don't show Dan getting ripped apart. They show that you hear it, and they show the effect on Parker and Joe.
The horror that they're going through. Yeah, it's her boyfriend and his best friend. Like, just don't listen. Just don't listen. It's like, well, what else are we going to listen to?
And they emphasize that you hear tearing and smacking noises, and it's really
screaming.
You can't not listen. There's nothing else to hear.
It's a tense scene.
It is. They eventually blame each other for what's happened, and they fight. They weren't close to begin with, but they make up, and they kind of hold each other for a little bit of warmth.
Yeah.
And they talk as distractions, and they finally fall asleep. Morning comes, and Parker's bare hand, you mentioned she threw her glove, which was a foolish thing to do.
Yeah.
She fell asleep with her bare, ungloved hand resting on the metal bar.
Yep.
And in another like ew scene, kind of like the broken legs, she has to peel her hand off of this bar.
Yeah.
And it tears the skin off.
One thing I love about this scene is that at first she's like lifting her hand up, and it's lifting the lift up, and she's like, wait, what? I can't lift. I just thought that was cool. Like, instead of her just realizing it immediately and peeling it off, I had to like test it for like a mental check of reality.
Yeah.
You would do that. You'd be like, wait a second, why is this coming with my hand? Like, it was cool.
Yeah. She just woke up, and it seemed unnatural. Like, why is this happening?
Yeah, why is this lifting with my hand like Velcro? Yeah.
Yeah. So her screams just echo, and another kind of a great shot of the empty wilderness. Now it's daylight. Her face has patches of frostbite.
Yeah,
she's in rough shape.
Yeah, and I thought at this moment when they did a great job with the special effects, and I thought, what a cool Halloween costume would be to be a frozen corpse, and just like the way they did the frostbite all over her, I was like, man, they did a really good job with that for a low budget movie. It was done really well.
Yeah. She pees on the metal seat, and it drips off, and she's just sitting there crying.
I thought that must have been warming, at least.
You would think. Until it freezes.
Until it freezes again.
Yeah. Joe knows they're not going to make it much longer, and says he has to try climbing again. And it's another tense scene. He's climbing. It's cutting through his gloves, but he's holding on. And the wolves come and they're underneath, kind of waiting for him to fall. Like come to us. And as he gets away, he knocks loose a bolt on the original chair. And he makes it to the next chair. And then he goes again and he makes it to the main pole, which has a ladder to climb down. And so he climbs down and he starts downhill he gets a ski pole to fend off the wolves. And he starts down the hill on Parker's snowboard, promising to bring help. So Parker's now alone. Night comes, no help has come back. We don't know if she's going to make it till morning, but she does. She wakes up in the morning, no sign of Joe. As she moves, the bolt drops completely out of the chair, and the chair falls to the ground, but stops just short, hanging by one wire that's coming apart.
So one thread. Yeah.
Now she's close to the ground. And I remember when I first saw this, I'm like, okay, you got to jump right now.
Just let go. Yeah, let go.
And roll.
It just starts, If you're downhill anyways, just roll. Yeah.
But she jumps and doesn't roll. And then the lift falls right on her ankle and breaks her ankle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, you win some, you lose some. And
well, she's lucky she even got away, because it could have just stayed right there or fallen on her, or, the fact that it bounced off her ankle is lucky right there.
Yeah. So she's okay. Her ankle's messed up. She can't walk or run per se, but she starts crawling, tumbling, and sliding down the hill.
Another broken foot movie for me, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. We hobbled and then we had a chairlift fall on her foot. So she just basically starts scooting down the hill, and she's tumbling and rolling and sliding, whatever it takes. And she comes upon Joe's body. The wolves that were chasing Joe as he left apparently caught him.
And his intestines are hanging out, and there's just like bones sticking up, and the dogs are licking it and eating it. And
so there's another little tense moment where she's like, oh boy. But one looks at her, growls, and then goes back to eating Joe.
As long as it doesn't try to take the food, they're kind of like, this is ours, leave us alone.
And they're like, well, we got to chase her. This is just sitting
We already have a
meal.
Eat this. Yeah.
So she continues down and makes it to the road, and a car goes past and she's waving, but it doesn't see her. So she crawls out into the edge of the road and collapses there, where a minivan comes by, helps her up, and is headed to the hospital with her. And she hears Dan's voice when they first got stuck up there. He was telling her, it'll be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And she hears Dan's voice in her head. And we assume she's going to be okay, traumatized, of course, but she makes it through. Good parts about this movie. It's got a lot of tension. It's got a lot of what would I do in this situation? It's got a lot of scenarios to work through. I think the characters are really one-dimensional. They're not really developed at all.
Yeah, like I said, it's like that 80s ski movie, college goofy, they start off, they're kind of goofy. And then I'll say one thing that really bothers me about this movie is it starts off, the first act is fun. Like, it's really cool. These bubbly, fun college kids get in this horrific situation. And then as soon as Dan dies, I think the movie slows down for 30 minutes. And it just gets really slow. Like, it just, like, the pacing to me was just really off in this movie. And then all of a sudden they get to the situation where Parker escapes, and then it's like she goes through this horrific thing, and then the movie just ends. So there's this like part in the movie where like Joe and Parker are like wake up in the morning, and they have this like 20-minute scene where it's like a Danielle Steele book. Like, they're just like talking about like love and boyfriend. Like, she's like, so why are you single? You're a good guy. And like, they're having this like coffee, like they're having coffee. And I'm like, you guys are in a traumatic situation. Why are you guys talking about this stuff? Like, it made to me that it was just absolute filler. Like,
and I agree with you. It was the only attempt at character development, but it rang
the wrong time. That should have been done in the beginning.
and it really didn't develop the characters at all. Even the stories they told each other
made no sense.
Were nothing.
Yeah, if someone tried talking to me like that, I'd be like, "Are you delusional? We're gonna die." Like, I would have just pushed her off the lift.
Joe was played by character actors in a lot of things. Sean Astin, and I
Mhm.
actually really like him in several
Yeah,
different things.
yeah.
I don't think
I,
the acting was top notch here at
I
all.
think he was Iceman from the X-Men, I think.
What was he?
Yeah, yep. Another Marvel superhero character that is randomly thrown into all these movies.
Well, you got this is where he learned how to control ice from being stuck in the snow.
Yeah. Yeah, but that part of the movie just I was like, is this Dawson's Creek all of a sudden? Like it threw me off. Yeah.
This movie, and it's a short 90-minute movie,
Mm.
and it feels like it really would be better served as an hour episode of an anthology show.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they had a great premise, great idea, and too much filler.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Again, some of the scenes are fantastic. Some of the cinematography is really good. The
yeah.
tension is good. I think, I think it's not a 90-minute story.
No, no, like there's
And
this part where Joe goes to talk to this girl in the beginning, and the boyfriend comes over and has his I don't know if you ever watched South Park, but he has this Stan Darsh moment where like they kind of like in season 6 of South Park, they make fun of ski movies. And like the coolest guy on the ski club, he comes over and calls Stan Marsh, goes, "What's up, Stan Darsh?" And everyone starts laughing at him. And like they're making fun of those like ski boyfriend tropes. And
yeah,
they put that in this movie. Like the guy comes over, you talking to my girl, bro. Like, and it's just like, okay.
yeah, he's helping her put
Yeah.
her bindings in, and he
It's
just
like,
comes over
yeah,
and pushes him on the ground.
people don't act like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just such an old trope. And like, I was like, did they
Yeah,
really put that in this movie? Like, yeah, this movie lost me on some scenes,
yeah.
but it
So,
was great tension
so there's yeah,
some of it. Yeah,
yeah, some good stuff and some weak
yeah.
stuff, but all in all, I would recommend seeing it. It
It's a
certainly
fun winter movie. Yeah.
it fits the category. It certainly is not in the class or anywhere near the class of a Misery or a
No,
classic.
no. This is a fun B movie that you watch when you're on a snowed in day and you have nothing to do. You
With
know?
credits and everything, it's really about 80 minutes worth of movie. So if
Yeah.
you got an hour and 20 minutes, you can
It's
knock this
fun.
one off. It's good fun.
Yeah. So I want to hear what you were gonna do for getting off the lift.
Okay, and I said this right away. My plan was I know how those wires are,
Yep.
and I know you probably would have a hard time once your hands get cut. In movies people can do like superhuman things, and you can,
Yeah. People can do it in real life. Yeah. A mother's baby under a car, she'll lift that car. Yeah.
but it's rare. But people in movies do like stuff all the time, like, oh, my hand's getting cut on glass, but I'm still holding on. You're probably not.
John McClane. Yeah. Yeah.
My first plan when we first saw this movie was take your ski pole, get up to the wire, put the pole over the wire, and hold on, and
Yeah.
slide down to the next cart. Do the same thing, slide down to the tower.
Okay, that's pretty brilliant, Jerry. If I ever get stuck on a ski lift, I want to be with you because I would have never thought of that.
The pole has the tensile strength to do it. It's going to
Yeah.
protect you from the thing. You got gravity working for you, and you
Yeah.
can just ride.
You're a genius. I never thought of that.
I don't want to die. I'm going to
Yeah.
find a way out.
There were some people online that said, "Well, why don't you take your clothes off and make like a Hansel and Gretel rig and like go all the way down?" And I'm like, "Well, because there's wolves."
Right.
Like you have that's the whole point of it. Like you're not ignoring them. Like they're coming after you, you know.
Now,
So
again, when they first got stuck, I had this plan. I had not yet factored in the wolves, but um, if you would have your ski pole with you, you
yeah,
obviously got to get on one of those snowboards and beat feet fast.
you better be flying because yeah, those things come. They're hunters. They'll stalk you for a month.
So that was my plan, and I don't know
Yeah.
if it addresses the wolves.
Well,
Uh,
I think it does because you can keep going from lift to lift until you get back to the main cabin area.
You could do that, yeah.
Yeah.
I was
That's
just
the
thinking
best
getting to
plan.
the
That's the
pole and
best
getting to the
plan I've
ladder.
heard. Yeah. That's the best plan I've heard. That's really good.
Thank you. All right, so we might be a little early to the frozen. We're not in the dregs of winter yet, but
Yeah. But it was a fun topic either way. You know, like we're feeling the drafts of September coming in and it's pretty much Christmas time.
absolutely. All right, well, that's our show for this week. Thank you for listening as always. This is the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry. That's Matt. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jerry.
Horoscope with Jerry and Matt.